So we often start with a question just to kind of get things going. Ryan, I usually just spring questions on Ryan, and I don't know if he hates it or he likes it, but they come out of left field.
They're fun as long as you have something to say.
Yeah, well, okay. So we're gonna be talking about 401ks a little bit today, because Mark, you're an expert in this field, so we're gonna want to tap into that. But one of the things that sometimes comes up in 401ks is hidden fees and where fees are in 401ks and things like that. But there are hidden fees everywhere in what feels like almost everything. And so much so that we've even had the president issue, I guess maybe even an executive order on they're trying to use the CFPB or the FTC to try and crack down on fees and make it easier to get refunds and cancel memberships. So this is a very long-winded question. But what this is for both of you. What hidden fee drives you the craziest? I'll even give you a second because I've got one that comes to mind for me like that. It is when somebody in my house that I live with, that I'm related to by marriage, orders Uber Eats, and it's like a turkey sandwich plus a $2 delivery fee, plus a $2 California convenience fee, plus a paper straw fee, plus another fee. Next thing you know, this $20 sandwich is now $40, even though it's been delivered to your front door, but there are fees upon fees upon fees upon fees. That's one of my pet peeves. How about you guys?
Brian, you're killing me because you stole the one I was about to give you, right? Obviously I'm not from around these parts. I'm English originally, but I lived in New York for a good 11 years. And in New York, a slice of pizza, you can get one of those for like $2. And recently I've now moved out to California, and I forget which one of the apps it was. It might have been Uber Eats. It might have been Grubhub, but one of them. First of all, the pizza was $20-something, which still gives me a bit of a heart attack. But by the time it actually got to my door, it was over $50. And $50 for a pizza. I struggled to eat that thing at that point. I don't know if I should eat it or frame it at $50, you know? And it's funny, like all those little add-ons that come in with it. And then I think the other one that drives me crazy is tickets to things.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Like Ticketmaster kind of stuff.
Oh my goodness. Right. And I won't mention any specific brand names or anything.
I just did. Like that. Maybe I did it for all of us.
I'll leave it to the lawyer or the person with the law degree to mention brand names. But I saw a story recently that because of all the extra fees on tickets in the US, people were buying tickets to see Taylor Swift in Paris.
Yes.
Going for like a long weekend, hotel, everything included, because it was cheaper than trying to go see Taylor Swift in concert where they were. And how does that make sense?
Crazy.
It doesn't. Probably, which is maybe this is the Taylor Swift effect, and that's encouraged the president to try and crack down on these things. Ryan, how about you?
Mine definitely because of the amount that we do travel as a family. I would say the hotel resort fees are definitely the one that probably pokes me in the side the most. I would just appreciate, I think, that they just plug that into the price, right? And maybe that's what's going to ultimately happen with all of this is if they end up banning it, they're just, they're going to try to still keep their profit margins. And so instead of having a $300 hotel room with a $50 resort fee, it's just going to be $350. I'd rather still have that just because, again, when you're searching for things, they don't include the fees, right? And especially for hotels, like, generally, if you're using Vegas, for example, they're all charged different fees, right? So you really do got to look at each one, compare how much it is net of the fees before you actually get to choose the one that you're going to stay at based upon price. Again, if they just kind of plugged it in, I think it would just make things a lot easier. I will also say it's the greatest thing about why having credit card points is nice, because you don't have to pay those resort fees if you end up using credit card points.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, again, you kind of look at the net about how much you save on the room, but then how much you're saving on the resort fees when you're using points. It makes a big difference. But definitely one of my bigger pet peeves.
We can count Airbnb in here with some of those fees. You look, you're like, oh man, I can have a 3-bedroom, 2-bath place at the beach for $300, and then you go to check out, and you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't pencil. Why is it $2,000 for 3 nights now? You know,
cleaning fees, Airbnb fees, taxes, like it's all in there.
Yeah.
The thing to me is, the question to ask is, if at the end of the process, if I had seen all of those together, would I have made a different choice? Right. And that, I think that's what the president and so many other initiatives are really aimed at, is people might have gone a different way if the end result was revealed earlier on in the process. And that's the thing that I think is, that's when people feel misled. They feel suspicious of the process, when that nickel and diming, adding. And I, for one, can't wait for it to literally just be a price.
Yes.
Right? Mark wants his $20 pizza back.
I do. You have no idea. Plus, like, I'm British. I still can't get over the fact you add sales tax on things.
Right? I was actually going to bring this up.
Mark, hold on. So, Mark, tell me, what's tipping like? Like tipping? If we were going to go out to dinner in London.
Oh, well, like in London, we in Europe, we pay our wait staff. Or is that too sensitive an issue?
Yeah, no, that's not too sensitive. That's some straight talk here.
But also I spent 10 years on luxury yachts in the Caribbean, and so I lived off tips for a long, long time.
Sure.
Did well off tips, and it does encourage you to do a better job.
Yep.
But you need everybody in the process to adhere to that process, or you end up not getting any money for the work you do. So it swings and roundabouts.
Sure.
I don't know. Like I'm in favor of tipping, but I think you need to sort of make it universal. Like, if you come into this country, you're going to tip folks that do this, this, and this.
Yes.
And then the struggle is you also get the male person going, hey, please tip me at Christmas as well.
Yeah, I know. Every time you turn around, you have the touch screen. Please do 5, 10, 20% on everything. Well, we could go on and on about these hidden fees and tipping and not actually being advertised, pricing, transparency, and all this stuff. But we'll get into fees and 401k as it relates to 401ks and some other things that business owners need to consider. But with that out of the way, are you guys ready to kind of dig into the meat of this episode?
Yeah, let's jump in.
Absolutely.
Right. Let's do it. Welcome back to the Casual Friday Financial Insights podcast. If you've been listening for the last couple of minutes and you're hearing a new voice, it's because we have a guest. We have Marc Fowler with us, with Ryan and I today. He's the Director of Retirement Education at Human Interest, which is a 401k provider with more than 25,000 customers. And full disclosure, a lot of the advisors here at Ford Financial Group partner with Human Interest to help provide 401k resources to the businesses that we serve and the business owners that we work with. Marc specializes in supporting partners and clients about the power of 401k plans and, frankly, the ever-changing landscape when it comes to 401ks, because especially we are based in California. As Marc has mentioned, he's in California now, and a lot of our businesses are in California, and California has made some changes here recently to require businesses to provide a retirement savings option, whether it's through CalSavers or through a 401k. And the rules have changed to where even in the next few years, if you have any employees at all, you are going to be likely be required to have a retirement saving option for your employees. And so we've been doing more and more 401ks. if you're a business owner, you chose the right episode to listen to. Because Marc is a great resource, and this is something that we're seeing more and more with our clients and having to solve for this problem. So Marc, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm delighted to be a part of this. And I'm feeling rather intimidated after sort of looking you up, Brian. You've got quite the bio yourself. So really privileged to be here and delighted to talk anything 401k or even small business.
Well, we appreciate that. I'm running the risk of a little bit too much alphabet soup behind my name. You know, when your LinkedIn profile runs off the page, it's probably time to cool it and maybe put down the pen and paper and stop gathering those things. But it helps with everything that changes, staying on top of these things, especially after we're in the process, and all the advisors here are in the process of doing all of our continuing education. And the more letters you have after your name, the more CE you have to do every year. So that's a burden. That's a burden as well. I think we can kind of dig in, because one of the real things that we're talking about, Marc, and Ryan, jump in here also if you want to. More and more businesses are doing 401ks, and you are well versed in the state requirements with a 401, especially in California with 401k, and the new rules that have come with the CalSavers mandate, where businesses with 5 or more employees are required to provide a retirement plan or enroll in CalSavers, and there's some penalties that can come if you don't do that. And in the not too distant future, we'll probably see businesses with fewer than 5 employees meet these same requirements. And so we're seeing more and more 401ks, which I think is a good thing. I mean, would we all agree that more saving for retirement is better than less?
The idea, I think, is very good.
Yeah,
to force employers to put in place a plan for their employees that, some employees that don't necessarily want them, but or think about it, but for the ones that do, forcing the employer is helpful.
I wouldn't be where I am if I thought any different. So
sure. Well, it's a little bit like the tips that you were saying, right, Marc? If we all can agree this is a good idea, let's systemize and make it go.
100%.
Well, and so as we're seeing this, it's great, right? You can call your financial advisor. We can figure out, speaking of these fees, we can find a low cost. I know the retirement plans that I use the index funds that are low cost, really easy to administer. And I know the fees that human interest charges are really competitive and, frankly, in my opinion, cheap. And so I think now that we're having more and more people install these plans, great, you've got this plan for your employees, but now it needs to be managed, right? Mm-hmm. And you are off into the abyss. And some of the things that come into play is that the Department of Labor can come in and audit your 401k plan, which is, I think, something that business owners don't consider when they're installing these plans. Marc, are you seeing more and more of these audits go on?
I think overall, yes. I mean, we get to see the statistics across the country, and the last 5 years, 2019 through 2023, we saw our biggest 5-year period, where it was something like $573 million of corrective action was taken in the category that includes DOL audits. But to say we see a lot of it is it increasing? Yes. That's sure. Up significantly. I think it's 10% on the previous 5 years. But still, when there's over sort of 750,000 401k plans, we're seeing less than 1% of those plans audited every year. So, it's like that meme you might see that says, the chance of getting attacked by a koala is really low, but not zero. And that's when they bring up the scary looking koala on the screen, right?
Yeah. So it's not necessarily that they're auditing a higher percentage, is what you're saying, but there's because of like CalSavers, there's going to be more plans tomorrow than there was 5 years ago, and so maybe more of just like the same percentage of audits, but there's a lot more plans out there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that with so many plans being out there and so many people being out there, the DOL has created this group called the Employee Benefits Security Administration, and it's really a watchdog, right? As we're getting more people in who maybe don't specialize in running 401ks because they're small businesses and they're busy running a million different parts of their organization.
Right.
Maybe they're not so focused on the ins and outs of running a 401k. So really there is this sort of watchdog that, and I use the term watchdog, not in any sort of pejorative sense, but just to kind of keep an eye on our plans being run with their participants in mind, right? And that's that fiduciary responsibility. And I'm sure anyone who's listened to you, Brian and Ryan, over the time has heard the fiduciary part of that, right? And that's something that has to be taken very seriously, because there are people now putting their life savings into the hands of others, and that should be taken very, very seriously. So I think, yes, Ryan, you're right. The proliferation of 401k plans, plus the fact that we're now seeing more plans in the hands of folks who, they run auto body companies, they run hospitality companies, right? So I think all of that mixes in to say, yes, there is an opportunity for more sort of oversight and guidance in it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we have plans for doctors and lawyers, and they're some of the worst business people that we deal with, right? They're fantastic physicians, and they can file some amicus brief with the court, but God help them if you ask them a question about their 401k, they don't know the answer. What triggers a DOL audit, Mark?
Yeah, and there's a number of ways to sort of get into a DOL audit. The first thing to realize is that if you have a well-run plan and you exercise your fiduciary duties, it's really unlikely that you're going to end up this way. But some of the sort of key triggers, I think probably the most common is a participant complaint. So somebody who's in your plan, maybe is experiencing some delayed withdrawals or late contributions, or feels they haven't received the necessary notices and files a complaint with the DOL, right?
Yeah.
So obviously there's a consumer element there with the EBSA. The next is if you have any of the sort of official parties within the plan engaging in what they call prohibited transactions, and to kind of give you a little shine a light on what that could mean, so if the employer is giving contributions in a non-timely fashion into the plan, or if they are not if they're not taking the loan repayments and putting them back into the plan in a timely fashion, that can be considered, in fact, a loan to the employer, which is a prohibited transaction. Sure. Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that will show up on your Form 5500. Right? And that's how the DOL is seeing that. So they're like, hey, something's a little amiss here. Let's go in and take a look. And actually, the Form 5500 is another way. Like if you have issues with filing that, or some inconsistencies in the document itself when it hits the DOL, that can trigger an audit.
Sure.
And then there are sort of two lesser ways in. Typically, if the media is reporting negative things about your sort of financial situation, et cetera, about the organization, they might come in and tap on your door. And then if the IRS or SEC or another related government agency is also investigating, they might well refer you back to the DOL for them to have a look at the retirement plan as well. So a number of different ways in, but again, frequency not that high on a well-run plan.
Now, Mark, does it matter about?
Well, I will say a well-run plan is the key qualifier in this, right?
Right.
You know, it's,
Mark, does it matter about size of the plan in terms of the likelihood that you're making a mistake on a 10-person plan with $30,000, let's say, in it versus a much larger or mid-sized organization? Does that differ?
I don't actually have any specific evidence on that. Everything we see suggests the incidence is, it's less than 1%, dramatically less than 1% of all plans that gets audited over a 5-year period. So statistically, it's hard to pull anything else further from that because they don't give us more insight into who is actually being audited. But my understanding is if any of those sort of triggers are true, then you're just as likely to be audited. That's my sort of understanding of the situation and what we're seeing.
I'll say it seems like more plans than you would think have like Form 5500 filing issues, right?
Yes.
And that's like driving with your check engine light on your car, where you're like, the car's still running, so it's probably nothing, but you're really rolling the dice. When you've got these issues, or even if you don't have someone helping you spot that you've got these issues.
Oh, 100%. I mean, just because you have a Form 5500 does not or an issue with a Form 5500 doesn't equal an audit. There is self-correction techniques and all these kinds of things that you can work, specifically if you've got a sort of advisory team with you to help spot that and find that. So you don't, just because the Form 5500 was incorrect doesn't mean you're going towards an audit.
Right.
But it definitely does raise the likelihood.
I got to imagine that like a 5500, a lot of the errors probably happen with an employee or an employer that doesn't really know what they're doing. But, they feel like, I think I get what this box is asking for. So, let me run some numbers and I'll fill it out loosely, kind of loosely fill it out and then submit it. And, versus having a professional that knows exactly what they're doing, do it for them.
Ryan, you've just explained how I file my taxes every year. But I think you're absolutely right. And that, there are providers out there now that will support filing the 5500 on your behalf.
Yep.
Right. Because of exactly what you're saying there, Ryan. Again, we don't have specialists running the plans. And so they are looking to keep their lives easy and free of any, unnecessary hassle. And that's where providers are beginning to give those or take on some of those fiduciary responsibilities because we don't have specialists running plans.
Right. Which seems like a slam dunk to me, just to kind of beat this car analogy into the ground. Like I'm not gonna pop the hood and try and figure out why my check engine light is on. I'm only gonna do more damage than help, And if you've got someone you trust that can get under the hood and do the work for you and charge you a fair price for it, it makes a whole lot of sense to offload that. So if you're the doctor or lawyer with the 401k, go do your doctoring and your lawyering and not your financial advising for all of your employees.
Agreed 100% on that.
Yeah. Mark, what happens in a DOL audit?
So the DOL engages the EBSA, the Employment Benefits Security Administration, and they assign an investigator to the case. And I think one of the first things to call out is not all audits are the same. So the process can take varying amounts of time, sometimes just a few weeks. Sometimes it can go on as long as a year. All right. So again, if it's a small plan and it only has a couple of challenges here or there, that's not going to take a year. Right. Yep. But if it's a big, complicated plan, thousands of employees, that may well take longer. All right.
How does an employer or plan sponsor prepare for an audit if it's coming?
Well, I mean, the first part obviously is to be organized in and of yourself, right? So make sure you know where all your records are. Make sure you know you've got clear access to your payroll records. You've got a good conversation happening with your provider, and take the time to sort of audit your own plan. Where are these issues coming from? How do I create, bring together the documentation, specifically in and around investment procedures? Have you documented I don't know if this is an actual English word, but the prudency of your process?
Yeah.
If not, I'm claiming that word.
Yeah, we're picking up what you're putting down. Yeah.
I'm trying to get myself into the dictionary one way or another. And really what you want to be able to demonstrate is that you are a good steward of the plan, that you are doing everything you can to operate the plan in the best interest of the participants.
Now, but the employer is not going to go it alone when it comes to something like this, right? Who else might be able to help with a DOL audit?
Well, you're absolutely right. And we're not in the advice business, but it's often good to get specialist folks on your side with the DOL audit. So you obviously have the opportunity to represent yourself if you wish, but you can also bring in ERISA attorneys. All right. And if you haven't run into the ERISA term, that's Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And the lawyers who understand that law package are very, very useful in this situation. And then, of course, your service provider as well. Obviously, they're going to be providing records, hopefully, anyway. And one of the keys with getting through an audit quickly is timely responses, detailed records, etc. So you do want the service provider involved. How much, though, depends on the provider, because there are now opportunities. There are providers out there who will not only refer ERISA attorneys, but also provide audit expense coverage, right? And I bring that up. Obviously, we do it at Human Interest. We think it's the right thing. If you're with us and something flags on an audit, we want to make sure that we're through that process with you, right? Because it's unlikely that people have decided that they want to try and hoodwink the government. So there's probably an issue somewhere, and we want to make sure that we're supporting you through that. We assume best intentions and all that kind of thing.
Well, but it seems like, we've walked down this road of like, okay, then what happens? And then what happens? And then what happens? And suddenly we're talking about hiring ERISA attorneys. Boy, an ounce of what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? It's like, boy, if you can just get it right in the first time with your filings and dealing with your employees and your fiduciary that you're working with on the plan, you can save yourself a lot of headache, a lot of money, a lot of time.
Yeah, Mark, quick question to too. Yeah. Like if you're going down the audit and you actually do have a problem, right? Then they're going to look for you to rectify that and fix that problem. Yeah. I imagine too that comes along with some kind of penalty or something of consequence to the employer. So can you talk to a little bit about what happens in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to sort of make clear is that the DOL audit is not initially supposed to be a sort of penalizing process, right? It is supposed to just make sure everything is operating the right way, right? So the first part is the investigator will come in, examine all the documents, conduct interviews if necessary. and then will issue what they call a voluntary compliance letter if corrective action is needed. Right? In just about 1/3 of cases, there isn't even that needed. Right? But if there is, in the other 2/3 roughly, they will issue a voluntary compliance letter. And that will outline, hey, take these steps to bring your plan back into compliance. Right? So that's part one. If there are penalties associated with some of the irregularities that have happened, they'll also issue the notice of penalties. However, actually, no, I'll come to that in just a second. Once the sort of voluntary compliance and penalties are taken care of, penalties if they occur, then they'll issue a closing letter and we'll all go happily into the future. The one thing they can't take care of are those sort of illegal activities, things like fraud, criminal misconduct, or repeated either intentional or negligent flouting of fiduciary duties, right?
Right.
If those happen, then they have to send that on to somebody else, right? The criminal activities have to be handled appropriately.
Where they go and penalize and recover funds and do those kinds of things.
Yeah. And again, I don't think my assumption is that folks listening to this podcast won't ever find themselves.
Yeah, we're not fear mongering here, but if we're going to walk all the way down this road, we might as well reach the end and say, yeah, at some point, you might be financially penalized for bad acts or at a minimum negligence in administering your plan.
Yeah. And rightfully so, right? If you're either intentionally or intentionally misleading your participants or negligently doing so, I think it's right that you get held accountable for that.
Yep. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. This has been enlightening. And I think, when we talk with business owners, or I'll speak for myself, Ryan, you can chime in here. When I talk to business owners, man, they're so good at what they do. And like many business owners, the reason they started their business is because they're good at the thing they're good at. And they're so good that people want more, and it becomes a business, and then they hire. And then so many business owners, if you ask them, they're like, oh God, if I could just get back to doing the thing that I loved doing to begin this, as opposed to running payroll and managing this and having, a group healthcare plan and installing a 401k, which is now required of me, being able to offload this stuff or at least get help with it from experts is a key. So I think if I just described you as a business owner, you can shoot us an email at info@fordfg.com and we can kind of start that conversation with you to talk about how we can help, or how Mark and Mark's team at Human Interest can help all of us together to kind of come to some of these solutions. So you're not walking down this difficult road of one step after another through negligence or bad acts of finding yourself in an audit and then penalized or reprimanded in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I'll add something in real quickly, because I know like one of the things with 401ks is that it could be easier, it could be hard, right? Regardless, it's going to be additional work if you don't have one and you're adding one in. But I think being like with the right provider that can really help onboard everything is probably the most difficult problem for an employer getting things started. Once you're past the onboarding process and you've started it and you're in month 6, it's pretty streamlined. But I think like being with the right team is going to make like a night or day difference about how smooth things go and how even the employer and employees probably perceive the plan. It's going to be based upon how things start originally.
The onboarding doesn't even have to be hard. Not anymore.
No,
I mean, we've got electronic signature and auto deposit. I took a plan from they were like physically writing checks and mailing them off to the plan, and it's like, what are we even doing? And now employers, I know, for example, like the Human Interest Plan, employees get an email every pay period saying, hey, this much was put into your plan by you, and this much was put into your plan by your employer. And it's just all above board. And all you got to do is check your phone. It doesn't have to be hard anymore. It really, really doesn't have to be hard anymore.
And that's the interesting thing, sort of bringing it back to the junk fees that we talked about. The junk fees often occur because of how it used to be done, right?
Yeah.
It used to be an incredibly manual process, and it used to be really hard to administrate. That's not the case anymore. There is this wonderful broad thing called technology that has come in and redefined the experience. Right. It allows advisors to advise rather than roll their sleeves up and move files around. It allows providers to give top level service at a scale they haven't been able to do before. Right. All the way down to individual, sole proprietor businesses can now start a solo 401k. Right. It doesn't have to be the way it used to be. And all those fees that have just hung around in the background associated with those old ways of doing business don't have to exist. And all the sort of administrative responsibility, hassles, etc., that came with that also don't have to be a part of the future.
Absolutely. And I know today that we're talking about the DOL and audits. I think, Mark, next time, we'd love to have you back. And the next time you're on, instead of coming from, I don't want to say the fearful angle of like audits and what can happen, there are so many, even with that aside, there's so many good reasons for an employer to say, this is opportunity for me as a business owner to save, for me to attract good talent and keep them with my business, which is harder than ever to do these days. There are a whole bunch of other great reasons to do a 401k for your business and for your employees that we will have to cover in the next episode.
You're speaking my language now, Brian. We could do a whole series on this if you don't stop me. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, watch, don't make promises because I might take you up on that. Well, Mark, I'll pause here to just remind everybody, if you are listening and you haven't done so already, subscribe. We are on YouTube, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcast. Click the subscribe button so you can hear more of these conversations, because I think they're relevant to a lot of people. Even if you're not a business owner, even as a 401k participant, learning about these things is a good thing for you to learn about. Mark, we usually wrap up with a really broad question, which is, what's on your mind these days? And it can be anything from what you're watching, what you're reading, what you're out doing now that the weather's finally starting to cool off a little bit. What's on your mind these days?
Oh, great question. I think, coming from a different country into the US, I see in many ways, and I'm not trying to get too big on this or too hot button, but a country divided. So one of the things that's on my mind is how do I relate to people who have different viewpoints, different perspectives? Because I think that's one of the wonderful things about people in general and this country specifically. And I'm reading a book now called Super Communicators.
Oh.
And it talks about how to actually communicate in a way that sort of brings perspectives that would normally create friction. It's how do you find a way to allow both things to exist in a conversation and actually create a relationship around that. And I think
great.
I find it incredibly powerful and maybe even hopeful that there are people talking about that, about how we bring people back together again. Right?
Seems super relevant today.
I think so. Because
everyone is sick and tired of the discourse, and I don't care what side you're on. It's tiresome.
It is. And the other thing is you lose so much vibrancy and interest if you only talk to people who are just like you.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely.
And so
that's a great recommendation. What's the book again? Super
Communicators. And I forget the guy's last name, but his first name, but his last name is Duhigg. I think it's Duhigg. something like that. And it's a
I'm
really
gonna add
well written book.
I'm going to add that to my reading list for this fall. Ryan, what's on your mind?
Okay, well, I'm going to report back on something I said I'd come back and talk to. So, Mark, I had this was back in, I think, July. My knees were hurting me, and I had told Brian I'm gonna go to do a cryotherapy after this session.
Oh yeah,
which I've never done. And I was always interested for years. You hear about athletes doing them, and so, anyways, after that episode, I went online, found a place that would take me that day, and did it. So have you done this before, Mark?
I haven't. I've seen people do the ice baths and all that kind of thing.
No, you can have that. I'm never gonna get in a ice
okay.
bath.
So anyways, I go to this. It's like a spa, but like you go in, they put booties on your feet, they put gloves on your hands. You have a robe on, so you're basically just wearing your underwear. You walk into this this chamber that you're standing up in. Your head is out of it. There's a technician with you as well. And so they're basically
in the pod with you.
They're in there. Well, you take off your robe, like inside the therapy. I mean, inside the unit, they're outside in the room, just monitoring and turning on the unit. They're not actually in there with you. And so, yeah, they're just pumping full of gas. It's cold. It's supposed to be, negative like 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I opted for something in the medium range. Just because I didn't know what to expect or what to survive. It was definitely cold. It was 3 minutes. Having a technician there talk to you does make it go by faster because, you're trying to have a conversation. I will say that I definitely feel like an ice bath is way colder and a lot cheaper.
But what were the results like, right?
Yeah,
it felt good. Like my knees felt good. I will say this. So in February, when I was probably having some knee problems, I actually, after I played pickleball, would go into the pool and just go up to like waist high, because we don't have a bath in our house. So I would just go in the cold pool. It felt good to be in there for a few minutes. I would say it wasn't much difference doing the cryotherapy. Obviously a lot cheaper to, go in the pool during the winter. And I would say an ice bath, if people have the ability to do that, is probably just as effective and much cheaper alternative.
I will be doing neither. I will tell you.
I will say that when I have sore knees, when I have sore knees, it really does feel much better doing it and being done with it.
I'll have two Aleve and a scotch. I'm not doing this.
Each their own.
I'm not doing this cold plunge stuff. No way.
I have Scandinavian heritage, so I feel like I kind of honor my ancestors if I could do this.
Yeah. Oh. On a side note, my neighbor Adam he goes to Costco every Sunday, and he sent over a cold plunge for $199 at Costco selling right now. So he's like, who's gonna be the first to opt in and buy this?
You guys are crazy. That's crazy. Well, I will say what's on my mind. I might need the ice bath. What's on my mind right now is a heck of a lot of tennis. I just got done binging the U.S. Open, which means everybody in my household is all revved up and out playing tennis like at every opportunity, especially with the weather getting cooler. So that's what we're up to these days. But with a bunch of tennis, God, like last week we played, I think it was 2.5 hours on the court. I was dying at the end. So maybe I'm all talk right now, but maybe an ice bath would have felt good after that. I don't know. But that's what's going on in my neck of the woods right now. So, well, I think we'll leave it there. Again, if you're interested in more of these conversations, I'd say subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, if you are listening on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts on YouTube. If you have a question for Ryan and I, you can email us at info@fordfg.com. Of course, if you have a question for Mark, we'd be happy to pass it along to him. You can email us and we'll forward it to him and be sure to get an answer for you. But I think we're going to leave it there. Mark, we hope to have you back.
In a heartbeat, Brian, in a heartbeat.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much for having us.